Senator Young.
Mr. Commissioner, thanks so much for being here and welcome. You can be at ease for a moment. I don't typically start off with a statement, but I will have a question for you, sir. I'd like to speak to the medical device tax. The suspension of this tax is set to expire at the end of this year, and with that in mind, medical device companies must make contingency plans to potentially pay this onerous tax. The money to pay the tax must be set aside now and cannot be used to hire new workers, invest in R&D, or expand businesses. A Department of Commerce study projects that in 2 years, the tax, when it was in effect, it cost an estimated 29,000 jobs. Beyond the tax, there are also significant compliance costs to allowing the medical device tax to resume. I think it's good for all of us in the committee to recognize that these compliance costs would not be recoverable even with a retroactive fix, or a fix just weeks away from the tax resuming, which we have a habit of doing around here. This is why I'm working with my colleagues here in the Senate to eliminate or immediately delay this harmful tax before it comes into effect. I want to spend a minute focusing on the IRS's role in the collection of the medical device tax. It's an excise tax that taxpayers will be required to pay the tax on a semi-monthly basis if the suspension ends, beginning in January of 2020. And as I understand it, the IRS would have to go through a cumbersome process for both it and for industry of refunding payments to companies if we were to be in a position to retroactively address this problem. I've been told that the process of refunding any retroactive payments to companies could take months, leading to a further delay in deploying capital, in hiring new workers, or spending more on research and development. So with those thoughts in mind, I just asked my colleagues on this committee, I asked colleagues that may be watching these proceedings to not allow this devastating tax to be reinstituted on the American economy. Retroactive action by Congress next year cannot fully undo the impact of allowing this tax to be triggered on January 1st, 2020. Just as an aside, I should certainly add that Indiana is a robust medical device development and production state, so this is really important to Indiana's economy. Turning now to the Earned Income Tax Credit. I believe that the EITC has been an incredibly positive part of our tax code for a number of years. It encourages Americans to work, reduce poverty, and can help move folks off of traditional welfare programs, just as Milton Friedman sort of envisioned it as the negative income tax a number of years ago. And I agree with my colleagues across the aisle that we need to look at the EITC as a model that might be expanded. When we know the credit is getting to the taxpayer, it is designed to help. However, EITC continues to suffer from a high improper payment rate. This is due, at least in part, to the complexity of applying the credit to the individual taxpayer's particular situations. It's also due to some measure of fraud. I believe if we could work together in a bipartisan fashion and drive down the improper payment rate, we could start a real conversation about putting those savings towards a more robust EITC. I really want this to happen. Commissioner Rettig, what lessons have you learned about how to improve the EITC this past filing season? Is it all enforcement and compliance, or are there ways the IRS could simplify EITC for taxpayers?
From the IRS perspective, the IRS has provided as much outreach, education, not only to taxpayers, but also to preparers. It's a routine topic at a lot of different, they're called tax forums that IRS hosts around the country, trying to educate preparers, try to educate taxpayers, online information, hard copies of information. And with that, the effort went from $16 billion overpayment in 17 to 18 billion in 18. So it's an issue that we have a lot of resources devoted to. My personal reaction is it requires a congressional fix to the statute itself to make it a statute that's easier to administer. And the majority of the issues come down to what's the definition of a qualifying child, which Doesn't necessarily mean it's a child who, in the ordinary sense, we would say is related to me, but they do qualify, and then we need to verify that. And so that process is very complex for us.
So you answered my second question. You need greater guidance from or leadership in Congress on this issue. Would you or members of your team dedicate yourselves to working with my staff on this issue?
Absolutely. We're very interested in it.
Thanks so much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.